I heard the term dopamine addiction being thrown around and it not having to do with being addicted to hardcore drugs and actually to do with a lot of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And it can cause us to feel super high highs, super low lows, procrastination, lack of motivation. It can cause us to feel even depression in some scenarios. And so I'm like, what is this dopamine addiction? What are the things that are causing this and leaving us feeling these negative emotions? Welcome back to another episode of Initial Impressions. My name is Kaylee Pommering and I'll be your host today. I am very excited for today's episode, talking about all things dopamine, which is really interesting topic that I've been diving into a lot recently because I know I've struggled with randomly, having mood swings or feeling like really low energy or feeling a lack of motivation even when something really matters to me. So I'm like, what's up with this? So I've been, researching it a bit recently. I listened to a podcast by Jay Shetty and it has TJ Powers in it. And he is the lead neuroscientist and founder of Dose Labs. And that was a super interesting episode. I 10/10 recommend that. He shares some really good habits for improving your focus and balancing out these hormones in your body. But I'm going to touch on some of the things that I learned. I was blown away at the amount of things that cause abnormally high spikes of dopamine in our regular life and why that's a problem. Okay, so let's talk about what dopamine is. Dopamine is a hormone that gives us the feeling of well-being, and it gives us a reward when we do something that's pleasurable for us. It's that kind of like feel good sensation. Now the thing is like scientists argue about like what caused us to have dopamine, and people say that it was for our survival, that we've had to do such grueling things to survive and grow as humans and as a society. Would we have done those things if we didn't experience the dopamine hit afterwards? Like, would we have been able to scour the woods and find food to eat if we wouldn't have got that dopamine reward when we found it? Would we have been able to continue to protect our family and like build houses and homes if we didn't get that dopamine reward satisfaction from having earned and having taken care of ourselves? So that's, what people kind of speculate on. I think that makes a ton of sense. If we think back to when dopamine was a reward and not so easily accessible, that was more so from things like when you would clean up. Afterwards, you feel that sense of satisfaction, or when you would do something really good for yourself, like go to the gym or do a cold plunge. When you do a cold plunge, by the way, I've been doing them recently. You submerge your body in like 47-degree temperature water and it's fucking gold. But if you can last a couple minutes, you literally get a huge dump of dopamine afterwards. It's like 250% more dopamine. It's literally insane, but it's such a healthy dopamine hit because you're doing something that's good for your body. So you're not necessarily always feeling good during the activity from these tasks that give you the dopamine hit at the end, but it's rewarding you for having taken care of your body. The cold plunge is good for a bunch of reasons. It helps with decreasing inflammation in the body. It helps with your immunity. It helps with your energy levels. It helps with your hormone regulation. Like, cold plunges have lots of benefits. And so do these other things. Like, think about the feeling that you get when you clean your sheets and you get into bed at night and you've got fresh bedding and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. Like, I'm so glad I did this for myself. I'm so glad I went to the gym even though it was hard during. These dopamine hits, they're earned and they kind of have like a delayed response. Like, you're not getting them necessarily immediately. Like, you're not getting them while you're doing the task. You're getting them towards the end of the task, and it's more of a gradual thing. And the other thing is you're likely only getting these hits a couple times a day. Now, there have been some changes in our society that have made it to where we get dopamine hits from a lot of things and very, very frequently. One of the most common ones is from social media. So when we're scrolling, it seems like it's enjoyable in the moment, and we're getting these dopamine hits. Every time you're getting this quick information, you're seeing this video and it's like super funny, or it's just giving you information so quick, and that is lighting off these like dopamine receptors in your head, and you're getting these dumps of dopamine and it keeps you locked in, and all of a sudden you've been scrolling for 2 hours, and then you stop and you feel disgusting, or you feel guilty, or you feel like you just wasted so much time, or you feel drained. Maybe you just literally feel drained, and it's like it seemed like it was enjoyable while I was doing it, and now that I've stopped, I feel like I need to do it again, or just sit here feeling gross. And that's not a fun place to be in. I'm not saying that like it's bad for you to scroll on social media, but you know what I'm talking about. Like most people, if you have a phone, if you have social media, you have had encounters where you accidentally got lost in the abyss for like 2 hours scrolling, and it felt good during and it did not feel good after. And not only does it not feel good after, it can lead to brain fog, a decision paralysis where like you feel like you should be doing something and you just don't even know what to do. You have a hard time. Maybe you have decision fatigue, like you can't even make decisions. Your brain is literally just like dead, pleated out, like just depleted. And so this isn't the only thing that makes us feel like this either. Now, when it comes to these dopamine hits that really weren't earned and they sometimes feel good during but make us feel shitty after, I'm going to call these cheap dopamine hits rather than the earned dopamine that we've gotten as a reward for doing something really good for ourselves afterwards, something that we've earned. So when I refer to cheap dopamine, that's that highly addictive, short spikes of dopamine that we're getting way too often in our day-to-day lives. Another thing that gives us hits of dopamine way more often than we probably need is sugar. When we're consuming things that are heavy in sugar, and just there's so many foods that are kind of like highly addictive because of that, and it's lighting off these dopamine receptors, and it's something like, yeah, the cake tastes good while you're eating it, but when we get addicted to this dopamine hit that it gives us, we suddenly eat too much, and then we feel disgusting afterwards, or we feel like uncomfortable, or we feel guilty, we feel shameful because we knew that really wasn't something that was good for us, but the dopamine hits made us think that like we should keep doing more because it's that, you know, it's that good sensation going off in your brain. And these are some like modern day addictions that a lot of us don't even realize that we're having because they're so normalized. Another one is coffee, like caffeine. Some people have a problem with like drinking multiple cups of coffee a day. And I'm not necessarily talking about like having a couple regular brewed cups of coffee. I'm talking about like people getting shots and shots and shots of espresso where they're like 70 milligrams of caffeine in each one of those shots, and you've had 6 today. Like those caffeine addictions, that's because of the dopamine that spikes when you're hitting it. I've even noticed for myself, like I always cap out at 2 shots. But I fell into this rut where I was getting coffee every day, and suddenly I didn't get coffee one day and I was like itching for it. And I was like, I don't like that. I don't like that I'm itching for the coffee right now. Like I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to feel like I need anything, like I have a dependence on anything. And so I did a little fast, did like a 4-day fast, and I didn't drink any coffee, which was honestly really nice for me. And it kind of helped me reset my system. But it's just something to be cognizant of. I'm not saying that you should never eat sugar, or you should never scroll on social media, or you should never drink coffee. But it's really helpful to be cognizant of, am I doing this for the dopamine hit? Or do I want to enjoy the taste of some nice cake? Do I want to enjoy a nice made latte? Do I want to consume some social media that like is enjoyable for me? It's a different perspective. It's a different impulse. And you can tell by how much you feel like that desperation for it, or if you feel super uncomfortable when you decide not to do it, or if afterwards it leaves you feeling super like shitty. If that's the case, then maybe there's a little bit of an unhealthy dependence on the dopamine reward, the cheap dopamine that you're getting from that activity, from that consumption. Here are a couple other ones. I'm sure there are more, but alcohol and drugs do the same thing. They set off the dopamine receptors, and they all kind of, every alcohol, and drug, they kind of do it differently. It affects the chemistry in the brain differently, but most of them do affect, if not all, affect your dopamine levels to some degree. And that's what gives you that feel good now, shitty after. You feel depleted, and it wasn't something that was actually good for you. And so that dopamine reward, it comes with a cost. It comes with the cost of you not actually feeling good afterwards because it wasn't good for you. And then we have gambling, pornography, sex, those can be highly addictive because of dopamine. I mean, pornography is a huge problem right now. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm not the one to say you should or should never consume pornography. That's not for me to tell you. That is for you to decide for yourself. But if it leaves you feeling like you have to watch it all the time, like that's an issue. And if you just practice fasting from any of these things for a time period and see how that resets your dopamine levels, you might be amazed at how much better you feel, because you're not going to have the guilt and the shame anymore, because you're doing things that are good for yourself. You're regulating out that hormonal imbalance that you basically have because you are consuming so many cheap dopamine hits that, like, it's just not sustainable throughout the day to the day. You're not meant to experience so much dopamine throughout the day. Like, your body's not meant for that. Your body was meant to experience dopamine after you did something good for yourself and you earned that dopamine reward. And it was only supposed to happen a handful of times a day. Two more that I saw were video games. That's why they can be kind of addictive to, it's hard to stop playing. You're getting that, like, dopamine reward from it. And shopping, that can be something that gives you some dopamine too and can be addictive as well. So all of these things, it's for you to decide whether or not they belong in your life at all, or if they just need to be moderated. And as long as you're staying cognizant and aware and you're being intentional about your consumption of these things, that's for you to decide how it benefits your life. But if any of them you feel a particular resistance to stopping, if you think about, like, oh, well, if I stop shopping all the time, like, that freaks me out, more than likely that's the area that you need to practice a fast in the most. And so prove it to yourself that you're strong enough, that, like, there are other ways for you to get dopamine and that are better for you. I'm so heavy on a not just cold turkey, like, don't just stop and think that the problem's going to be solved. Like, you need to integrate a new belief, you need to integrate a new practice to replace the one that you want to stop. So if you've had a problem with some of these cheap dopamine hit addictions, then what we're going to do is we're going to think about, what can I do that is going to give me dopamine in a healthy way, that's not going to leave me feeling depleted. It's not going to leave me feeling like I need to procrastinate or I have decision paralysis or I'm feeling a lack of motivation. Like, no, what can I do to consume dopamine in a way that makes me feel super good, super happy about my life, super motivated, and super excited about, pumped up, full of energy? Well, there's a few things that you can do. Doing any type of chore for yourself, whether that's some type of cleaning or washing your clothes, folding your laundry, changing your sheets, that's going to give you a dopamine hit. Brushing your teeth first thing in the morning, some cold water on your face, that's going to give you a little dopamine hit. They're kind of smaller, but they still give you dopamine that's not, like, icky. Like, it doesn't leave you feeling icky afterwards. You can do things like meditation releases dopamine, working out releases dopamine, cold plunges releases 250 times more dopamine. There are so many activities that you can take, and fill the spots with that. Even giving yourself little challenges. Like on that podcast that I referred to earlier with TJ Powers, he talks about phone fasting and not allowing yourself to look on your phone or see any of the notifications or just acknowledge your phone in any way for, like, the first 30 minutes to an hour of your day and the 30 minutes to an hour before you go to sleep. And that's something that I've regularly tried to practice in my life, and I've genuinely noticed such a difference. And that even comes down to, like, I keep it on D&D almost all the time, because you also get dopamine hits when you get notifications. And then you have anticipation that, like, gives you a little bit of anxiety if you see all the notifications, but you're like, oh, I'm not looking at them yet. Like, that makes me feel like you get that kind of dopamine rush and that little, like, anxiety anticipation for those notifications. I don't want any of that cheap dopamine, okay? So what I personally do is I keep it on D&D. If I decide to use a guided visualizations in the morning, I know exactly where that visualization is, and I get to it super fast, and I don't look at anything else on my phone while I do it. I just go straight there, straight to YouTube, straight to the one that I have saved in my library. And I keep it really simple for myself. I stay off of my phone. I find other tasks that I can do for myself in the morning. The best way to actually successfully do this is to keep your phone away from you in the morning. If you can put it somewhere a little further away from you, if you can use an alarm that's, like, not attached to your phone, even better, because it reduces the temptation. If you can immediately get up when you wake up and, like, immediately go do something, take action, it's going to be easier for you to avoid getting on your phone. So these are things that you can do. You can read. I love reading so much, like before bed, rather than like spending all that time on my phone and getting trapped in there, and then having the lights from the phone that also keep your brain really stimulated. It makes it hard for you to sleep. I instead I read, whether that's like nonfiction or fiction, whatever I feel like. And I take the time to do that. Sometimes I journal in the morning or at night. It gives me my brain something to focus on that is good for me, and it's satisfying for me. It's reflective for me. It's sharpening me as a person. And these habits are so good for me and something that I'm so grateful to have integrated into my life. And it is making it abundantly easier for me to have more control over these cheap dopamine addictions, have more control over my level of motivation, my level of, efficiency and energy and productivity, because I am, really being careful about what I consume and how I let these things rule my life. And I feel like I have a lot more power and control, and in a really good, healthy, empowering way. And so if you think any of these things would help you, I genuinely recommend just experimenting with it. If you could fast from any of these cheap dopamine hits that you struggle with, even just for 7 days, so you can allow your body to just see what that feels like, to not be living under the weight of these decisions, to not be feeling like you need to do these things, to allow that grip that it has on you to loosen, to experience what it's like to not be getting cheap dopamine hits all the time and experiencing their crash afterwards. You don't have to have a life filled with those things. It's so easy in our society. It's so easy to justify it. And yes, it's normal, but that doesn't make it good for you. That doesn't mean that you can't rise above what everybody else is doing, and you can't step out of that zombie mode and choose what's genuinely good for you and your body. You deserve to have the best quality of life that you possibly can. So spend a little time today thinking about which of these have a little bit too much of a hold on me, that more than I'm comfortable with, and what could I do to limit that consumption for the next week? What could I do to fast in these areas for the next week? And after you experiment with this fasting for a week, I want you to sit down and journal about how it made you feel to be abstinent from these things, or to moderate these things more closely. Journal about that. Think about that, because sometimes we don't allow ourselves to like actually sit and think, how did this improve my life? So I want you to, have a check-in now with how it's affecting you now, what the game plan is for the next week to 2 weeks if you think you can do that, and then have a little debrief with yourself at the end. Go over how it really made you feel to change these habits. I hope this episode was helpful. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I always appreciate it so much. And if this episode was helpful to you, please like, share, subscribe. If you think it would be helpful to somebody else, please share it with them. And as always, I hope that you are leaving more at peace than you came.